In a time long past, when the world was younger and the veil between the earth and the heavens was thin, there lay a kingdom nestled in the soft green foothills of the Himalayas. This was the land of the Shakyas, and its capital was a city of gentle beauty called Kapilavastu. The air here was sweet with the scent of mango blossoms and jasmine, and the days unfolded to the rhythm of temple bells and the soft lowing of cattle returning from the fields at dusk. Life was a slow and peaceful river, flowing under the watchful and benevolent eyes of King Suddhodana. The king was a good and just ruler, but for many years a quiet sorrow rested in his heart, for he and his beloved wife, Queen Maya, were without a child. They made offerings at the shrines, they gave alms to the poor, and they prayed that their love might be blessed with an heir. And so it was that one night, during a midsummer festival, Queen Maya had a dream of profound and luminous clarity. She dreamt she was carried by 4 celestial beings to a high mountain peak, where she was bathed in fragrant waters and adorned in divine silks. Then, from the silver light of the full moon, a magnificent white elephant, holding a white lotus flower in his trunk, appeared. It circled her 3 times, and then gently entered her right side, melting into her being like a snowflake on warm water. When she awoke, her heart was filled not with confusion, but with a deep and unshakable serenity. The court sages, wise in the language of dreams, proclaimed that the queen would bear a son destined for one of 2 great paths. He would either become a universal monarch, a king of kings who would rule the entire world with justice, or he would renounce the world to become a fully enlightened one, a Buddha, who would show all beings the path to liberation from suffering. King Suddhodana, a man of the world, a man of action and of earthly power, rejoiced at the first possibility and trembled at the second. He wanted a son to inherit his throne, to expand his kingdom, to be a mighty ruler. The thought of his heir becoming a wandering, homeless ascetic filled him with a quiet dread. In the fullness of time, Queen Maya knew her day was near. As was the custom, she set out to return to her parents, home for the birth. The journey was slow and pleasant, a gentle procession through sun-dappled forests and fields of flowering mustard seed. On the way, the royal party passed through a beautiful grove of sal trees in a place called Lumbini. The trees were in full bloom, their branches heavy with fragrant blossoms, and the air hummed with the sound of bees. The queen felt a deep desire to rest there. As she reached up to hold a flowering branch, a gentle calm came over her, and there, standing in the dappled sunlight of the garden, she gave birth to her son. It was said that the birth was without pain, that flowers rained down from a cloudless sky, and that warm and cool streams of water appeared from the heavens to bathe the mother and child. The infant, it is told, took 7 steps, and at each step a lotus flower bloomed in the dust. He raised one hand to the heavens and one to the earth, and spoke with a voice clear as a bell, declaring that this would be his final birth. The joy in the kingdom was boundless. The child was named Siddhartha, which means, he who has achieved his aim. But this great joy was touched by a shadow of sorrow. 7 days after giving birth, the gentle Queen Maya passed away, her earthly purpose fulfilled. She was reborn in a heavenly realm, and her loving sister Prajapati took the infant prince as her own, raising him with all the tenderness and devotion of a true mother. As news of the miraculous birth spread, a revered sage named Asita, who lived high in the mountain hermitages, saw the signs in the heavens and journeyed to the palace. The king, honored by the visit, brought the infant prince to receive the holy man's blessing. Asita took the child in his arms, and his ancient, weathered face broke into a radiant smile. He saw on the child's body the 32 marks of a great being. But then, to the king's alarm, tears began to stream down the old sage's cheeks and fall into his white beard. "Why do you weep, Holy One?" the king asked, his heart tight with fear. "Have you seen some terrible omen for my son's future?" "No, great king, no," Asita replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I weep not for the prince, but for myself. My tears are tears of joy for the world, and tears of sorrow for my own fate. This child will without a doubt become a Buddha, an awakened one, who will turn the wheel of truth for the benefit of all living things. His teaching will be a raft to carry countless beings across the ocean of suffering. I weep because I am old, and my own life will end long before that day. I will not be here to hear his profound wisdom." The sage's words were a double-edged sword for King Suddhodana. The prophecy was confirmed, and the king's fear took root deep within his soul. He was determined to prevent the second path. He would bind his son to the world with chains of gold and silk, with pleasure so complete and happiness so perfect that the very thought of renunciation would never enter his mind. And so began the gilded youth of Prince Siddhartha. The king built for him not one palace, but three, one for the cool season, one for the hot season, and one for the rainy season. Each was a masterpiece of art and architecture, with cool marble halls, serene lotus ponds, and gardens that bloomed year-round. The air was always perfumed with incense and flowers. The only music Siddhartha heard was the gentle melody of lutes and flutes, played by the most skilled musicians in the land. His companions were handsome and graceful youths, his attendants beautiful and smiling maidens. He was shielded from all that was imperfect, all that was unpleasant. No one who was old or sick was ever allowed within the palace walls. Even the fallen leaves and withered flowers were swept away by servants before the prince could see them. His life was a carefully curated dream, a world without blemish. He was taught the arts of the warrior class, archery, swordsmanship, and riding. He excelled at them all, his body strong and graceful. He was also taught philosophy, literature, and science, and his mind was sharp and inquisitive, absorbing knowledge as a thirsty field absorbs the rain. He grew into a young man of extraordinary grace and compassion. He was tall and handsome, with a deep calm in his eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. When he was 16, his father arranged his marriage to a princess of a neighboring kingdom, the exquisitely beautiful and gentle Yasodhara. Their love was deep and true, a perfect union of two gentle souls. They lived in the heart of the palace, surrounded by every imaginable luxury. Days were spent in pleasant conversation, wandering through the gardens, listening to music, and enjoying the finest foods. The world outside the palace walls was a distant rumor, a story he had no reason to doubt or to question. Yet even in this perfect world, a seed of disquiet began to sprout in Siddhartha's heart. It was not a sadness, not a dissatisfaction, but a subtle, persistent question that hummed beneath the surface of the music and the laughter. He would sometimes sit alone by a lotus pond, watching the perfect blossoms open in the morning and close in the evening, and a feeling of profound mystery would wash over him. He felt a deep love for his wife, his family, and his life, but he also felt a strange sense of unreality, as if he were living in a beautiful play, while the real world existed somewhere else, just beyond the curtain. He began to feel a deep yearning to see the world beyond the palace gates, the world where his people lived. He wanted to see the city, the fields, the rivers he had only heard about in stories. He went to his father and made his request. King Suddhodana's heart sank, for this was the moment he had always feared. But he could not refuse his son's gentle and persistent wish. So he devised a plan. He commanded that the city be swept clean, decorated with flowers and banners. He ordered that all old, sick, or sorrowful people be kept out of sight. The streets were to be lined only with healthy, happy, smiling citizens. He would show his son a world just as perfect as the one he had created within the palace. And so the day came for the prince's first journey outside the walls. He rode in a magnificent chariot, driven by his faithful attendant, Channa. The streets were indeed filled with cheering crowds. People threw flowers before his chariot, their faces bright with joy. Siddhartha smiled, his heart warmed by the sight of his happy people. It seemed for a time that his father's plan had worked. But the gods, or perhaps the deep currents of destiny, had other plans. As the chariot turned a corner, a figure emerged from an alleyway, unseen by the king's guards. It was a man unlike any Siddhartha had ever seen. His body was bent and stooped, his face a web of deep wrinkles. His hair was white as snow, and he leaned heavily on a wooden staff, his hands trembling as they gripped the wood. He moved with a painful slowness, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Siddhartha stared, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Every person he had ever known was youthful, straight-backed and vibrant. This creature seemed like a broken, withered version of a human being. "What is that, Channa?" the prince asked, his voice a whisper. "Is that a man? Why is he so changed? Why does his body tremble so?" Channa, a simple and honest man, could not lie to his prince. He hesitated, knowing the king's orders, but the prince's earnest gaze compelled the truth. "My lord," he said softly, "that is an old man. It is what happens to all beings who live a long life. The body grows weak, the senses fade, the strength leaves the limbs. It is the way of all things born. You, my prince, and the beautiful princess Yasodhara, and I, and everyone we know, we are all subject to old age. None can escape it." The words struck Siddhartha like a thunderbolt. A chill crept over him that no warm palace breeze could dispel. Old age. He had never heard the term, never conceived of the reality. The cheering crowds and the festive banners faded from his sight. All he could see was the trembling old man, and in him he saw his own future, the future of his beloved wife, of his father, of everyone he had ever loved. The joy of the outing was shattered. "Turn the chariot around, Channa," he said, his voice heavy. "Let us return to the palace. What joy can there be in parks and pleasures when I know that this is what awaits us?" Back within the silent marble halls, the music seemed hollow, the perfumes cloying. The smiling faces of his attendants now seemed like fragile masks, hiding the inevitable decay that lay beneath. The king saw the change in his son, and was filled with despair. He redoubled his efforts, surrounding Siddhartha with even more dazzling entertainments, more beautiful dancers, more exquisite feasts. But the image of the old man was burned into the prince's mind. Some time later, his disquiet still heavy upon him, Siddhartha requested to go out into the city again. The king, desperate, once again ordered the streets to be prepared. But again, fate intervened. As they rode through a different part of the city, they came upon a person lying by the side of the road, moaning in pain. The person's skin was pale and feverish, the body racked with spasms. A look of deep and helpless agony was etched on their face. "Channa, what is this?" Siddhartha asked, his heart constricting with a pain that mirrored what he saw. "Why does this person lie on the ground, crying out? Why is their body so afflicted?" Channa's own face was filled with pity. "My lord, that is a sick person. Sickness can come upon any of us at any time. It brings pain and weakness, and it robs the body of its health and vitality. It is a part of life, a danger that walks unseen beside us all. No one, rich or poor, prince or peasant, is immune to sickness." Sickness. Another crack appeared in the perfect facade of Siddhartha's world. He saw now that not only was the body destined to decay in old age, but it could be assaulted by pain and suffering at any moment. The pleasure gardens, the feasts, the comfortable silks, what protection were they against a fever that could burn from within? The world he thought he knew was proving to be a place of profound and hidden fragility. "Take me back, Channa," he said quietly. "My mind can find no peace in these diversions, knowing that the threat of such suffering hangs over every living being." The king was now truly desperate. He saw his son growing more and more distant, his eyes filled with a contemplative sorrow. He placed guards at every gate, determined to prevent any further excursions. But Siddhartha's questing spirit could not be contained. A third time he persuaded Channa to take him out, this time in secret, without the king's knowledge, so they could see the city as it truly was. They journeyed to a part of the city he had never seen before. And there they came upon a small crowd of people, their faces streaked with tears, wailing in grief. They were following 4 men who were carrying a still, rigid figure on a simple wooden plank. The figure was wrapped in a plain white cloth, its face pale and utterly motionless. "Channa, stop!" Siddhartha commanded, his voice barely audible. "What is this procession? Why do these people weep so? And what is it they are carrying with such sorrow?" Channa's heart was heavy as he spoke the final, terrible truth. "My prince," he said, his voice low and somber, "that is a dead body. The person you see is no longer living. Their breath has ceased, their heart has stopped. They will not speak or move or feel again. This is death. It is the end that comes to every single being that is born. Your father the king, your mother Prajapati, the princess Yasodhara, you, my lord, and I, we will all die one day. There is no escaping it. Death." The word fell into the silence of Siddhartha's mind, like a great stone into a still pool, and the ripples spread out to touch everything. Old age, sickness, and now death. This was the true nature of existence, a truth that had been hidden from him his entire life. He saw it all with a terrible clarity. All the beauty, all the love, all the pleasure he had ever known was temporary, a fleeting dance on the edge of an abyss of decay and dissolution. The palace was not a fortress of happiness. It was a prison designed to hide the truth. His life of luxury was a lie. The suffering of the world pierced his heart like 1,000 arrows. He felt it not just for himself, but for every living being trapped in this endless cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. A profound compassion, vast as the ocean, arose in him. He knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he could no longer live a life of heedless pleasure. He had to find a way out. He had to find an answer. Was there a state beyond birth and death? Was there a release from this universal suffering? As they turned the chariot towards home, their path was crossed by one last figure. This man was different from all the others. He was a wanderer, with a shaven head in a simple patched robe of saffron color. He carried only a small bowl for alms. He walked with a slow, deliberate grace, and his face was a mask of perfect tranquility. There was no fear in his eyes, no anxiety, no sorrow. He seemed to be lit from within by a profound and unshakable peace. Siddhartha was mesmerized. In a world now defined by suffering, this man was an island of calm. "Who is that, Channa?" he asked, a flicker of hope igniting in his heart. "His expression is so serene. He seems untouched by the sorrows of the world." "That, my lord, is a renunciant, a holy man," Channa replied. "He is one who has left behind his home, his family, and all worldly possessions to seek the truth. He wanders in search of a path that leads beyond the suffering of old age, sickness, and death." An answer, a possibility. The sight of the serene ascetic planted a seed of resolution in Siddhartha's mind. This was the path he must take. He could not be a king who ruled over a kingdom of fleeting joys and inevitable sorrows. He must become a seeker, a wanderer, who would not rest until he had found the deathless, the unborn, the unaging, the unailing, the ultimate peace. That night, back in the palace, the world seemed to hold its breath. The king had arranged the most spectacular entertainment yet, with the most beautiful dancers and the most enchanting music, hoping to finally drive the sorrow from his son's heart. But Siddhartha saw it all as if from a great distance. He saw the beautiful moving bodies of the dancers, and thought only of how they would one day grow old and still. He heard the sweet music, and thought only of how it would fade into silence. Late into the night, he sat in contemplation. The dancers and musicians, exhausted, fell asleep where they lay, their graceful poses collapsing into awkward slumber, their instruments silent. In the flickering lamplight, the scene looked like a charnel ground, a vision of decay. This sight solidified his resolve. The time had come. He rose and walked silently to the chambers of his wife, Yasodhara. She was asleep, her face serene in the moonlight, her hand resting protectively on their newborn son. The king and queen had named the boy Rahula, which means a fetter or an impediment, hoping a child would bind Siddhartha to his home. And looking at them now, Siddhartha felt his heart tear in two. The love he felt for them was a physical pain, a chain of pure gold, but a chain nonetheless. A part of him wanted nothing more than to stay, to wake his wife, to hold his child, and to forget the horrors he had seen. But a larger part, the vast compassion he felt for all beings, knew that this personal love was a part of the attachment that led to suffering. To find the cure for all, he had to leave the few he loved most. He whispered a silent farewell, a promise that he would one day return with a gift far greater than any kingdom, the gift of truth. He went to the stables and woke his faithful charioteer. "Channa," he said, his voice firm but gentle, "saddle my horse, Kanthaka. We are leaving tonight." Channa's eyes filled with tears, but he saw the unshakable determination in his master's eyes, and knew he could not refuse. They led the great white horse Kanthaka from the stables. It is said that the very stones of the courtyard were muffled by unseen hands, that the horse's hooves made no sound, and that the guards at the great city gates were cast into a deep slumber so that the prince could pass unnoticed. They rode through the silent city and out into the dark countryside, the moon their only guide. They rode until the sun began to streak the eastern sky with pale light. They came to the bank of the Annamaya River. Here Siddhartha dismounted. This was the point of no return. With his sword, he cut off his long, dark hair, the symbol of his noble caste, and cast it to the wind. He removed his fine silk robes and his princely jewelry and handed them to Channa. He asked a passing beggar to exchange his rough homespun cloth for the prince's finery, and the beggar, astonished, agreed. Clad now in the simple robes of a wanderer, Siddhartha turned to his grieving friend. "Go back, Channa," he said gently. "Take Kantaka and my belongings, and return to the palace. Tell my father, my mother, and my wife not to grieve for me. I have not left them out of a lack of love, but because of a love for all the world. I go now to seek an end to old age, sickness, and death. Do not worry. I will not return until I have found what I am looking for." Channa wept, and the great horse Kantaka shed tears that fell like pearls onto the dusty ground. With a heavy heart, Channa began the long journey back to Kapilavastu, leaving the former prince, now simply the ascetic Gautama, to walk alone into the vast, unknown world, his only possessions a robe and a begging bowl, his only guide a burning question in his heart. And so began the long years of searching. The path of a seeker is not a straight one, and Gautama's was filled with trials and profound lessons. He walked south, through forests and villages, his bare feet learning the language of the earth. He learned to live on whatever food was offered into his bowl by charitable villagers. At first, the coarse food and the hardship of the road were a shock to his body, which had known only the finest comforts. But his resolve was harder than any stone. He heard of two very famous spiritual teachers. The first was a master of meditation named Alara Kalama. Gautama went to him and, with his sharp and disciplined mind, quickly learned everything the master had to teach. He learned to enter deep states of meditation, to quiet the mind, until he reached a state called the sphere of nothingness, a vast, empty, peaceful state. Alara Kalama was so impressed that he asked Gautama to stay and teach alongside him as his equal. But Gautama, while grateful, was not satisfied. He recognized that this state of nothingness, however blissful, was temporary. It was created by a specific mental effort, and when the meditation ended, he was back in the ordinary world, still subject to birth and death. It was a wonderful respite, a beautiful shelter, but it was not the final liberation. He thanked his teacher and moved on. He then sought out another renowned master, Uddaka Ramaputta. From him, Gautama learned to achieve an even more subtle and refined state of consciousness, a state called the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. It was a level of mental absorption so profound that it was almost impossible to describe. He mastered this state as well, and again he was invited to become a leader of the community. But again he saw that this too was a conditioned state, a temporary attainment. It was not the unconditioned, the deathless. It was not the end of suffering. With respect, he took his leave and continued his journey alone. He came to believe that the path to truth must lie not in subtle mental states, but in complete mastery over the body and its desires. He thought that perhaps by subduing the flesh, he could liberate the spirit. He journeyed to a grove near the town of Uruvela, a place known for its tranquility and its population of serious spiritual seekers. There, he was joined by 5 other ascetics, who were impressed by his fierce determination. Together, they began a life of extreme self-mortification. Gautama undertook practices that would test the very limits of human endurance. He practiced holding his breath for long periods until he felt violent, sharp pains in his head, as if it were being split by a sword. He would stand on one leg for days, or sleep on a bed of thorns, and most of all, he practiced extreme fasting. He reduced his food intake day by day until he was surviving on a single grain of rice, or a single sesame seed, or a single jujube fruit per day. His body, once so strong and handsome, withered away. His skin, once golden, became dark and clung to his bones like ivy to a dead tree. His ribs stuck out like the rafters of a ruined shed. His eyes sank deep into their sockets, looking, as he later said, like sparkles of water at the bottom of a deep well. When he touched his stomach, he could feel his backbone. He became so weak that when he tried to stand, he would collapse, fainting from exhaustion. The 5 ascetics who watched him were filled with awe. They were certain that if anyone could achieve enlightenment through such practices, it would be Gautama. They revered him as their leader, confident he was on the verge of a great breakthrough. But Gautama, in the depths of his weakness, began to have a profound realization. For 6 years he had followed this path of extreme self-denial. He had tortured his body and starved it to the point of death. And what had he gained? He had not found any supreme wisdom. He had not gained any insight into the nature of suffering. All he had achieved was pain, weakness, and the dulling of his mind. His mind was now too weak to think clearly, too exhausted to meditate effectively. He thought, "This is not the way. How can one who is so weak, so utterly depleted, find the strength to understand the deepest truths of existence?" He remembered a day from his childhood, long ago. He had been sitting under a cool rose-apple tree while his father performed a royal plowing ceremony. As he watched the proceedings, he had naturally and effortlessly fallen into a state of deep, blissful meditation. It was a state of peace that had not come from torturing his body or forcing his mind. It had arisen from a place of simple, clear awareness. The memory was a turning point. He realized the truth was not to be found in extremes. He had lived the extreme of sensual pleasure in the palace, and it had not brought him the answer. Now he had lived the extreme of self-mortification, and it too had failed. The true path, he understood, must lie somewhere in between, a middle way, a path of balance, where the body is cared for enough to be a healthy vehicle for the mind, and the mind is clear and strong, not weakened by indulgence or deprivation. It was like a lute string. If it is too loose, it makes no sound. If it is too tight, it snaps. Only when it is tuned just right can it produce beautiful music. He decided to abandon the path of extreme asceticism and to take some nourishing food. Just then, a young woman from the nearby village, named Sujata, was coming to the grove to make an offering to the spirit of a great banyan tree. She had prepared a special dish of rich milk rice, cooked with honey in a golden bowl. When she saw the emaciated figure of Gautama sitting under the tree, so still and radiant despite his weakness, she thought he was the tree spirit himself, come to life to accept her offering. With deep reverence, she approached and placed the golden bowl of milk rice in his hands. Gautama accepted it gratefully. He bathed in the nearby Naranjara river, and though he was so weak he could barely pull himself from the water, he then sat and slowly, mindfully, ate the nourishing food. It was the first proper meal he had eaten in years. Strength began to flow back into his limbs, and clarity began to return to his mind. But when his 5 companions saw him eating, they were horrified. They felt he had given up the struggle, that he had failed and was returning to a life of luxury. "The ascetic Gautama has become indulgent," they said to one another. "He has abandoned the quest." Disgusted and disappointed, they left him, journeying onto a deer park near the city of Benares to continue their own practices. Gautama was now completely alone. His last companions had deserted him. But he was not discouraged. He felt a new sense of purpose, a deep inner certainty that he was finally on the right path. With his newfound strength, he walked to a spot nearby where a great pipal tree grew, its leaves whispering in the gentle breeze. Later, this tree would be known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. He gathered some soft grass for a cushion and sat down at the foot of the tree, facing east. And there, he made a vow of immovable resolve. He said to himself, "Let my skin and my sinews and my bones dry up. Let my flesh and blood waste away. But I will not rise from this spot until I have attained the supreme and final wisdom, until I have found the end of all suffering." As dusk began to settle over the land, he settled his mind. He let his breath become soft and natural, a gentle anchor for his awareness. He entered a state of deep meditation, his mind becoming clear, sharp, and luminous, like a perfectly still lake reflecting the full moon. It is said that at this crucial moment, the tempter Mara, the lord of illusion and the embodiment of all the forces that bind beings to the cycle of suffering, perceived Gautama's intention. Mara could not bear the thought of someone escaping his dominion. He resolved to stop him. First, Mara sent his 3 beautiful daughters, Desire, Aversion, and Craving, to dance before Gautama, to distract him with visions of sensual pleasure, to remind him of the life he had left behind with his beautiful wife. But Gautama's mind was unshakable. He saw these visions for what they were, fleeting, impermanent, and ultimately hollow. They dissolved like mist before the sun of his concentration. Enraged, Mara then summoned a vast and terrifying army of demons. They came with monstrous shapes and fearsome weapons, creating a storm of thunder, lightning, and fire. They hurled rocks and arrows and spears at the lone figure sitting under the tree. But as the weapons flew towards Gautama, they transformed in midair into a gentle shower of fragrant flower petals. His mind was so filled with loving kindness and compassion that there was nothing for hatred or fear to latch onto. He remained perfectly still, an island of peace in a sea of chaos. Mara, in a final, desperate attempt, challenged Gautama directly. "You have no right to sit on this seat of enlightenment," he roared. "This place is mine. My armies are my witnesses that I am the Lord of this world. Who is your witness?" Gautama did not speak. He did not argue. He simply, gently, reached out with his right hand and touched the ground. He called upon the earth itself to be his witness. He was asking the solid, ancient ground beneath him to bear witness to his countless lifetimes of striving, of practicing generosity, virtue, and patience, all for the sake of this moment. And it is said that the earth rumbled and quaked in response, a deep, resonant voice that said, "I am your witness." Mara and his demonic hosts vanished, defeated. The last vestiges of illusion were swept away. The moon and stars shone with a brilliant clarity in the night sky. With his mind now completely pure, peaceful, and undisturbed, Gautama directed it towards the great questions that had driven him from his home. As the night deepened, his inner vision opened. In the first watch of the night, he gained the power to see all of his own past lives. He saw himself in countless forms, as a human, as an animal, in heavenly realms and in sorrowful states. He saw lifetime after lifetime, birth and death, again and again, like a vast, unending film. He saw how his actions in one life led to the conditions of the next, and he understood the great chain of cause and effect. In the second watch of the night, his vision expanded. He gained the celestial eye, the power to see the arising and passing away of all beings in the universe. He saw how beings were reborn according to their karma, their intentional actions of body, speech, and mind. He saw that those who acted with greed, hatred, and ignorance were reborn into states of suffering, while those who acted with generosity, kindness, and wisdom were reborn into states of happiness. He saw the intricate, impersonal, and perfectly just law of karma playing out across the cosmos. But he also saw that even the highest heavens were not a permanent escape, for all conditioned existence, however pleasant, was still subject to change and eventual death. In the third and final watch of the night, as the first light of the morning star, Venus, appeared on the horizon, he turned his mind to the ultimate truth. He saw directly into the nature of suffering, what the sages called dukkha. He saw that it was not just pain, but a fundamental unsatisfactoriness that pervaded all of conditioned existence because everything is impermanent. He saw its cause: craving, thirst, the relentless desire for things to be other than they are, the craving for pleasure, the craving for existence, and the craving to be free from what is unpleasant. He saw its cessation, the complete fading away and cessation of that craving, and he saw the path that leads to that cessation. He understood with a clarity that was absolute and irreversible the Four Noble Truths. He understood the principle of dependent origination, the 12-linked chain of cause and effect that traps beings in the cycle of rebirth. And in understanding it, he broke the chain. The fires of greed, hatred, and delusion within him were extinguished completely and forever. His mind was free. The veils of ignorance were lifted. He was no longer Siddhartha Gautama, the seeker. He had awakened. He was the Buddha. He sat for 7 weeks in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, experiencing the profound bliss of liberation. The questions that had burned in him for so long were answered. The burden he had carried for the suffering of the world was transformed into a boundless act of compassion. He was like a man who had been sick his whole life and had finally found the cure, not just for himself, but for everyone. At first, a doubt arose in his mind. This truth I have found, he thought, is so deep, so subtle, so difficult to see. The world is attached to pleasure, mired in delusion. If I were to teach this, who would understand? It might only be wearisome for me. But then, the divine being Brahma, seeing the Buddha's hesitation, appeared before him and implored him to teach. "Lord," he pleaded, "there are beings with only a little dust in their eyes. If they do not hear the truth, they will be lost. But if they hear it, they can be liberated. Please, for the sake of the world, teach the path you have discovered." The Buddha, out of his immense compassion, looked out upon the world with his enlightened eye. He saw that people were indeed like lotuses in a pond. Some were still deep in the mud, not ready to rise. Some were halfway to the surface, but others were right at the surface, their buds ready to open, just waiting for the first rays of the sun. Seeing this, he agreed. "The doors to the deathless are open," he declared. "Let those who have ears to hear, let them listen and have faith." He considered who he should teach first. His old teachers, Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta, came to mind, but he saw with his supernormal vision that they had both recently passed away. Then he thought of his 5 former companions, the ascetics who had abandoned him. He saw that they were staying in the deer park at Isipatana, near the great city of Benares. He knew that they were sincere and diligent, and that they would be able to understand his teaching. And so he began the long walk from the Bodhi tree to Benares. He walked with a new grace, a new radiance. Those who passed him on the road were struck by his incredible serenity. His very presence was a teaching. When he arrived at the deer park, the 5 ascetics saw him coming from a distance. "Look," one of them said, "here comes the indulgent Gautama, who gave up the struggle. Let's not greet him or show him any respect. We can just leave a mat for him to sit on if he wants." But as the Buddha drew closer, they were overwhelmed by the powerful aura of peace and wisdom that emanated from him. His demeanor was so utterly transformed, so majestic, and yet so humble, that they forgot their resolution. They instinctively rose to their feet. One took his bowl and robe, another prepared a seat for him, and a third brought water to wash his feet. They still addressed him as Friend Gautama, but he gently corrected them. "Do not call me friend," he said. "I have found the deathless. I have become a Buddha, a fully awakened one. Listen carefully. I will teach you the truth I have discovered, the path that leads to the end of all suffering. If you follow it, you too can realize this liberation for yourselves." The ascetics were skeptical at first, but the Buddha's calm certainty was so compelling that they agreed to listen. And there, in the quiet of the deer park, as the sun set and the deer gathered peacefully around them, the Buddha delivered his first sermon. This teaching is called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the setting in motion of the wheel of the Dharma. He did not begin with complex philosophy or metaphysics. He began with what was practical, with their direct experience. He spoke of the 2 extremes they all knew so well. "There are 2 extremes that should be avoided," he said. "One is the path of sensual pleasure. It is low, vulgar, and unprofitable. The other is the path of self-mortification. It is painful, unworthy, and also unprofitable. Avoiding these 2 extremes," he continued, "the awakened one has discovered the middle way, a path which opens the eyes and bestows understanding, which leads to peace, to wisdom, to enlightenment, to nibbana." And what was this middle way? It was the noble Eightfold Path. He explained it simply. Right understanding, to see things as they truly are. Right thought, thoughts of kindness, compassion, and renunciation. Right speech, speaking truthfully and kindly, not lying or gossiping. Right action, acting in ways that do no harm. Right livelihood, earning a living in a way that does not harm others. Right effort, the gentle persistence to cultivate wholesome states of mind and abandon unwholesome ones. Right mindfulness, being fully aware of the present moment, of your body, your feelings, your thoughts. And right concentration, the ability to steady the mind in deep, peaceful meditation. Then, he taught them the 4 noble truths, the very heart of his discovery. He presented it like a doctor, diagnosing and treating an illness. The first truth, he said, is the truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Not getting what one wants is suffering. In short, this whole existence, tied to the 5 aggregates of clinging, is suffering. The second truth is the cause of suffering. It is this craving, this thirst, which leads to re-becoming, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. That is, the craving for sensual pleasures, the craving for existence, the craving for non-existence. The third truth is the cessation of suffering. It is the complete fading away and cessation of that very craving, giving it up, renouncing it, being free from it, and no longer clinging to it. And the fourth truth is the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. It is this very noble Eightfold Path. As the Buddha spoke, his words were not just intellectual concepts. They were a direct transmission of truth. As he finished explaining the first truth, the leader of the 5 ascetics, Khandana, had a flash of insight. A profound understanding dawned in his mind. He saw, whatever is subject to arising is also subject to cessation. He had had the first taste of Nibbana. The Buddha, seeing this, smiled and said, "Khandana knows, Khandana knows." And from that day on, he was known as Anna Khandana, Khandana who knows. Over the next few days, as the Buddha continued to teach, the other four ascetics also attained this first stage of enlightenment. They became his first disciples, the first members of the Sangha, the community of awakened ones. The wheel of the Dharma, the teaching of truth, had been set in motion, and it would never stop turning. From that small beginning in the deer park, the community grew. The Buddha and his disciples wandered from village to village, from city to city, all across the great plains of the Ganges River. They walked gently on the earth, their robes the color of the dust, their only possession a begging bowl. They slept in forests, in caves, or at the foot of trees. The Buddha's teaching was for everyone. He taught kings and courtesans, merchants and farmers, Brahmins and outcasts. He made no distinction of caste or social standing. The only thing that mattered was a person's sincerity in seeking the truth. His message was simple and profound. Your liberation is in your own hands. It does not depend on gods or rituals or priests. It depends on purifying your own mind. He taught about karma, the law of moral cause and effect. He explained that every intentional action, word, or thought is like a seed. Wholesome seeds, planted with intentions of kindness, generosity, and wisdom, will ripen into happiness. Unwholesome seeds, planted with intentions of greed, hatred, and ignorance, will ripen into suffering. He taught that we are the heirs of our own actions. He taught about Nibbana, nirvana, the ultimate goal. It was not a place, like a heaven, but a state of being. It was the extinguishing of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. It was the supreme peace, the end of all suffering, a state of perfect and unshakable freedom. He taught with stories and similes that everyone could understand. He compared the mind to a wild monkey, jumping from branch to branch, which needed to be gently trained. He compared his teachings to a raft, built for the purpose of crossing a river of suffering. Once you have reached the other shore, he said, you don't carry the raft around on your back. The teachings were a tool, a means to an end, not a dogma to be clung to. Many people were drawn to his message of peace and self-reliance. Men and women from all walks of life asked to join his community of monks and nuns. His own father, King Suddhodana, eventually heard his son's teaching and found peace. His foster mother, Prajapati, became the first Buddhist nun. His wife, the gentle Yasodhara, also joined the order, and his son, Rahula, when he came of age, chose to follow his father's path, not as a prince of an earthly kingdom, but as a seeker of the kingdom of inner peace. For 45 years, the Buddha walked the roads of India, tirelessly teaching the path he had found. He was a beacon of wisdom and compassion in the world. His presence was calming, his voice was clear, and his logic was impeccable. He debated with philosophers, comforted the grieving, guided the confused, and inspired the hopeless. He established a community founded on principles of nonviolence, mindfulness, and mutual respect, a community that continues to this day. As he reached the age of 80, the Buddha knew that his time on earth was coming to an end. His body, like all conditioned things, was subject to decay. He and a small group of his closest disciples were journeying near the town of Kushinagar. He accepted a meal from a blacksmith named Kunda, and soon after, he fell gravely ill. But he bore the pain with perfect mindfulness and without complaint. He lay down to rest between two sal trees. He knew this was his final resting place. He gathered his disciples around him one last time. He did not want them to be lost in grief. He wanted to give them his final, most important instructions. Do not think, he said, his voice weak but clear, that when I am gone, you will be without a teacher. The teachings, the Dharma, and the discipline, the Vinaya that I have taught you, they will be your teacher after I am gone. He urged them not to grieve for his physical body. My body will pass away, he said, but the truth I have taught is timeless. He asked them 3 times if they had any last questions, any doubts about the path. The monks remained silent, their hearts full of sorrow, but their minds clear in his presence. Then the Buddha spoke his very last words. Behold, O monks, all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. With these words, he closed his eyes. He passed through the successive stages of deep meditation, his mind becoming ever more subtle and refined. And then, as peacefully as a candle flame is extinguished when the wax is gone, he passed from this world into parinibbana, the final, utter peace beyond all birth and death. The earth was still. The sal trees, though it was not their season, burst into bloom, showering his peaceful form with fragrant blossoms. For a time there was only a profound and sacred silence. The long journey of Prince Siddhartha, the ascetic Gautama, was over. The Buddha, the awakened one, had shown the way, and now the story is told, the path is laid out. The invitation to walk it remains, echoing softly through the ages. It is a path of mindfulness, of kindness, of wisdom. It is a path that begins with a single, gentle breath. Breathing in, you know you are breathing in. Breathing out, you know you are breathing out. It is a path that leads not to a distant kingdom in the sky, but to the peace that lies right here, within your own heart, waiting to be discovered. And so, with this peaceful thought, you can let go of the day, let go of all worries, and drift into a deep, calm, and restorative sleep. The path is there, the journey is yours, and it begins now, in this quiet, peaceful moment. Good night.